For context, Jessica and I have been married for 7 years. I've always prided myself on being a committed husband. We met in college, fell in love fast, and got married right after graduation. Our life together was built on what I thought was trust. Lately, though, things have felt off. Jessica's always been social, but her recent behavior has been strange. For months, she's been spending more time with her friends. At least that's what she claims. She's been dressing differently, buying new outfits she didn't show me, and seemed overly attached to her phone. I first noticed something was wrong during our office holiday party. Jessica came along, and while I was busy talking to my manager, I saw her chatting with Greg, one of my coworkers. They were laughing like old friends. Greg's a good guy, or so I thought. I didn't think much of it until I spotted her with him again at the snack table, whispering. Later that night, when we got home, I casually mentioned it. "You seem to be having fun with Greg," I said. She shrugged and laughed it off. "Oh, he's hilarious. You never told me how funny he is." It didn't feel like much then, but something about her tone stuck with me. 2 weeks later, I overheard Jessica on the phone late at night. She was laughing quietly, and when I asked who it was, she said it was Sarah. But the next morning, her phone lit up with a message from Mark, another coworker of mine. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was being paranoid. But the doubt had planted itself, and I couldn't shake it. What really made me suspicious was when Jessica started finding excuses to show up at the office. She said she wanted to bring me lunch, or that she was nearby and thought she'd stop by. Once or twice, sure. But 3 times in a single week. And each time, she seemed to bump into Greg or Mark. It wasn't long before her little surprises didn't feel so innocent anymore. My suspicions started consuming me. I didn't want to believe Jessica could betray me, but the signs were piling up. Her frequent visits to the office, her unexplained late-night outings, and the way she always seemed overly interested in my work events. All of it gnawed at me. One night, I decided to test her. "I've got to work late tomorrow," I told her casually over dinner. Her fork paused mid-air, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered in her expression. Then she smiled. "That's fine. I'll probably just have a quiet evening at home." Quiet evening, my ass. The next day, I left for work as usual, but instead of working late, I came home early, parking my car down the street to avoid detection. I let myself in quietly, the creak of the front door almost betraying me. The house was silent, but Jessica wasn't there. Her car was still in the driveway. I checked the bedroom. Empty. The living room. Empty. Then I spotted her phone charging in the kitchen. That's when it hit me. She never left her phone behind. I turned it on, thankful she'd never locked it. I scrolled through her messages and hit the jackpot. Conversations with Greg, Mark, and even Derek, another coworker of mine, were buried under mundane exchanges. I couldn't believe my eyes. The messages were brazen. From Greg, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it." From Mark, "Can't wait to see you again. Let me know when Ethan's working late." From Derek, "I'm still sore from the other day. You're something else, Jess." My heart sank. 3 of them? 3 coworkers? I scrolled further, finding dates, plans, and even explicit photos they'd exchanged. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. But I wasn't finished yet. If she was going to lie to me, I needed more proof. I found a location-sharing app she had installed and activated it. It showed she was at the nearest hotel. I drove there in a rage, parking across the street. Sure enough, her car was in the lot. I waited for nearly an hour before she emerged, with Greg, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. They hugged, kissed, and went their separate ways. When I got home, Jessica was already there, acting like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day. I played along. I had to. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Jessica and Greg outside that hotel, her laughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. I wanted to confront her right then, to demand answers, but my gut told me to wait. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Greg, Mark, and Derek too. The next day, I called in sick. I needed time to figure out my next move. First, I pulled out an old external hard drive and set up cameras around the house. I hid one in the living room, another in the kitchen, and a final one in the bedroom. If Jessica brought any of them here, I wanted evidence. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed spyware on her phone. I spent the next few days collecting data. The messages confirmed what I already knew, but the details were worse than I imagined. She wasn't just sleeping with them. She was mocking me with them. Greg. Does Ethan suspect anything? Jessica. Not a clue. He's too busy playing the perfect husband. Mark. You're incredible. Does he even know what he has? Jessica. He's clueless. Honestly, I deserve better. The final straw was a message from Derek. I'm starting to feel bad. He's a decent guy. Jessica. Don't. He'll never find out. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white. Decent guy? Never find out? They thought I was oblivious, that I'd never catch on. By the end of the week, the hidden cameras had recorded enough. Jessica had invited Greg over while I was at work. They laughed, kissed, and, well, the footage left no doubt about what was happening. But this wasn't just about catching Jessica anymore. I wanted them all to pay. My coworkers weren't just betraying me. They were jeopardizing my career, my reputation, and my sanity. That night, I made my first call to a lawyer. I wanted to know my rights, how to protect myself, and, most importantly, how to use what I'd found to ruin every single one of them. But that wasn't enough. I needed them to feel what I was feeling. I started planning my revenge. Revenge wasn't just an option, it became a necessity. Jessica and my coworkers had humiliated me, and I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. But I wasn't going to lash out recklessly. If I was going to burn their lives to the ground, it had to be methodical. Step 1 was gathering more evidence. The footage from the cameras was damning, but I needed to ensure their actions weren't just personal, they had to cross professional lines. That's when I remembered the company's strict anti-fraternization policy. Relationships between employees, especially when one held a position of authority, were a fireable offense. I focused on Greg first. He was a senior project manager, one rank above me. A little digging revealed he'd been logging company expenses for business lunches that coincidentally matched the times and places of his dates with Jessica. Next, I turned my attention to Mark and Derek. They weren't in managerial roles, but they had access to sensitive client data. It didn't take long to find evidence that they were neglecting their responsibilities. Missed deadlines, unfiled reports, all while they were busy with my wife. Step 2 was setting up their downfall. I compiled everything. Screenshots of texts, the video footage, and records of their unprofessional behavior. Then I created a presentation that laid everything out in chronological order, complete with timestamps and explanations. But this wasn't just about the workplace. Jessica had mocked me for being clueless, so I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions too. I started by quietly separating our finances. Joint accounts were split, credit cards canceled, and valuables moved into a safe deposit box she couldn't access. For the next week, I acted like nothing was wrong. I smiled at Greg during meetings, joked with Mark by the coffee machine, and nodded at Derek in passing. At home, I kissed Jessica goodnight and thanked her when she cooked dinner, all while my plans unfolded in the background. The final piece of the puzzle was timing. I scheduled a meeting with HR for the following Monday, claiming I had urgent matters to discuss. Meanwhile, I arranged a meeting with Jessica's parents. They had always loved me and would be instrumental in what came next. When the weekend arrived, I felt a mix of anticipation and cold fury. Everything was ready. By Monday, none of them would see it coming. Monday morning arrived, and I walked into work with a confidence I hadn't felt in weeks. My first stop was HR. Sitting across from the head of the department, I presented my case calmly and methodically. I need to report multiple violations of the company's policies. I began, sliding over a USB drive. This contains evidence of inappropriate relationships and misuse of company resources by Greg, Mark, and Derek. The HR manager, Laura, frowned but plugged in the USB. As she scrolled through the documents and watched snippets of the video footage, her face turned pale. "This is serious," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We'll need to conduct an investigation immediately." "I understand," I said. "But I want you to know I'm prepared to cooperate fully. These men's actions have compromised both the company's integrity and my personal life. I'm sure you'll find everything in order." With that, I left her office, knowing the first domino had fallen. That evening, I sat down with Jessica's parents. They had always treated me like a son, and I knew they'd be devastated to learn what their daughter had done. "Ethan, is everything okay?" her mother, Diane, asked, sensing my tension. I nodded slowly. "I need to show you something, and I'm sorry in advance." I pulled out my laptop and played a short clip of Jessica and Greg in our living room. Diane gasped, and her husband, Tom, clenched his jaw, his face turning red. "How long has this been going on?" Tom demanded. "Months," I replied. "And it's not just Greg. She's involved with 2 other men, co-workers of mine." Diane covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe this. Why would she do this to you?" "I don't know," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "But I thought you deserved to know. I also need your help. Jessica doesn't know I've uncovered everything. When I confront her, I'd like you to be there." Tom nodded firmly. "We'll be there. She needs to face the consequences of her actions." The next day, the office was abuzz with rumors. Greg, Mark, and Derek were all called into HR one by one. I didn't know exactly what was being said behind closed doors, but when Greg emerged, his face was ashen. Later, I overheard him on the phone in the break room. "What do you mean they're suspending me? This is bullshit." Mark and Derek were equally panicked, their usual cocky demeanor replaced with fear. By lunchtime, all 3 had been escorted out of the building, their belongings in cardboard boxes. I pretended not to notice, but inside, I was relishing every moment. That evening, I prepared for the confrontation. Jessica came home late, humming to herself as if she didn't have a care in the world. I was waiting in the living room with her parents, the laptop and files laid out on the coffee table. "What's going on?" she asked, her smile faltering as she saw the serious expressions on our faces. "Sit down," I said, my voice cold. When she hesitated, Tom barked, "Now, Jessica." She sank into the chair, looking between us nervously. "What's this about?" I hit play on the video. The color drained from her face as she watched herself with Greg, the sounds of their betrayal filling the room. I can explain," she stammered. "No." I cut her off, slamming the laptop shut. "You don't get to explain. I have texts, videos, and proof of everything. You've been cheating on me with not 1, but 3 of my co-workers." Jessica looked to her parents for support, but they glared at her in disgust. "You've disgraced this family," Tom spat. Diane wiped her tears and shook her head. "How could you do this, Jessica? Ethan has been nothing but good to you." Jessica broke down, sobbing into her hands, but her tears meant nothing to me. The damage was done, and the time for mercy had long passed. Jessica sobbed into her hands, her shoulders shaking, but I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. Only the cold satisfaction that she was finally cornered, with no room to squirm out of what she'd done. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice low but razor sharp. "I gave you everything. I trusted you, Jessica." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean to hurt you." "I didn't mean to hurt me?" I interrupted, my laugh hollow and bitter. "You didn't mean to hurt me while you were sneaking around with Greg, Mark, and Derek? While you mocked me in your messages? While you brought one of them into our home?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Her parents sat stiffly, their faces pale, the weight of her betrayal settling over them like a storm cloud. "I don't even know who you are anymore," her father finally said, his voice trembling with anger. "You've disgraced yourself, and worse, you've disgraced this man who has done nothing but love you." Jessica turned to him, desperate. "Dad, please, it's not what it looks like. It was just—" "Stop lying," I exploded, slamming my fist on the table. You've been caught. There's no wiggling out of this. You've lied to my face. You've humiliated me at work. And now you're trying to act like you're the victim. I didn't think you'd find out, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's your excuse? I said, incredulous. Not that you regret it, but that you thought you wouldn't get caught? Jesus, Jessica. Her mother, usually the kindest woman I'd ever known, stood up abruptly, glaring at her daughter. You don't deserve to be married to Ethan. You don't deserve anything from him. She turned to me, her face softening. Ethan, whatever you decide, we'll support you. You're too good for this. Jessica's sobs grew louder as Diane walked out of the room, Tom following close behind. For a moment, it was just the two of us, the weight of the confrontation hanging thick in the air. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said, breaking the silence. The divorce papers will be ready by the end of the week. I've separated our finances, and I've documented everything. You'll be lucky to walk away with the clothes on your back. Her head shot up, panic flashing in her eyes.
Ethan, no.
We can fix this. I'll stop. Don't you dare insult me by pretending you care, I said coldly. You made your choice. Now you'll live with it. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. As I left, I turned back one last time. When you're sitting alone in this house, wondering how everything fell apart, just remember, you did this to yourself. And with that, I walked out, leaving her to drown in the mess she'd made. The next few days were a blur of preparation and calculated action. Jessica tried to contact me multiple times, calling and texting with desperate messages about wanting to talk things out. I ignored every one of them. She didn't deserve a conversation. She deserved consequences. At work, the fallout was immediate. Greg, Mark, and Derek had all been terminated, their desks cleared out, and their reputations in tatters. The HR investigation had confirmed not only their unprofessional behavior, but also their misuse of company resources, thanks to the evidence I provided. The rumors spread fast, and their names became synonymous with disgrace. Jessica, however, wasn't done trying to salvage what little she could. She showed up at my office one afternoon, her face red and tear-streaked, looking like she hadn't slept in days. My coworkers stared as she begged the receptionist to let her in. I stepped out of my office and met her in the hallway. "What the hell are you doing here?" I hissed, keeping my voice low to avoid creating more of a scene. I need to talk to you," she stammered. "Please, Ethan, just 5 minutes." Her pitiful state might have swayed me once, but now it only made me angrier. "You're not welcome here," I said coldly. "Go home, Jessica. Whatever you have to say, I don't care." She reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "You've already done enough damage. Don't make this worse." Her voice broke as she whispered, "I'm sorry. Not as sorry as you're going to be," I said, then turned my back on her and walked away, leaving her standing there as my coworkers watched in stunned silence. Later that evening, I met with Jessica's parents again. They'd called me earlier, wanting to check in and offer their support. When I arrived at their house, Diane embraced me tightly, her eyes filled with sadness. "You didn't deserve any of this," she said. "We're so sorry for what she's done." Tom nodded. "If there's anything we can do, anything at all, you just let us know." "I appreciate it," I said, "but I've got it handled." I handed them a folder containing all the evidence I had gathered. "You should see this. It's everything she's been up to. I thought you deserved to know the full truth." Diane flipped through the pages, her face hardening with every photo and text message. "This isn't the daughter we raised," she said, her voice trembling. "No, it isn't," I said, "but it's who she chose to become." As I left their house, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Jessica had not only lost me, but she was losing the support of her parents as well. She was running out of allies, and it was exactly what she deserved. The final piece of my plan unfolded at a company-wide meeting later that week. Management gathered the team to address the vacancies left by Greg, Mark, and Derek. The official statement was filled with vague corporate jargon about policy violations and necessary actions to uphold company values. But everyone in the room knew the truth. I sat quietly as whispers circulated. The gossip was relentless, details about the three men's sudden departures morphing into exaggerated tales of scandal. For once, I didn't care about workplace drama. This time, it worked in my favor. Their humiliation was now public knowledge. Meanwhile, Jessica was unraveling. She hadn't stopped texting, but her messages had shifted from pleas for forgiveness to angry accusations. "You're being cruel," one read. "Do you really want to destroy me?" Read another. "Destroy her?" The thought made me laugh bitterly. She'd destroyed herself. All I did was ensure everyone saw the rubble for what it was. Jessica's desperation reached a new level when she showed up at my parents' house unannounced. My mom called me shortly after to tell me she'd found Jessica crying on the porch, begging for a chance to explain. "She wouldn't stop saying she loves you," Mom said. "But I told her love doesn't work like that. You don't betray someone you love." Hearing that made my chest tighten, but I shook it off. My parents had always been in my corner, and I wasn't going to let Jessica manipulate her way into their sympathy. The next day, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering, and a voice I recognized immediately came through the line. "Ethan, it's Greg." I couldn't believe his nerve. "What the hell do you want?" I need to talk," he said, his voice unsteady. "Everything's gone to shit, man. I lost my job, my wife kicked me out, and I don't know what to do." The audacity of his self-pity almost made me laugh. "That's not my problem, Greg. You made your bed, and now you get to lie in it." I know, he stammered. "But Jessica, don't you dare bring her up," I snapped. "You and the others destroyed my life, and now you're looking for sympathy? You won't find it here." He started to say something else, but I hung up. It was clear they were all starting to feel the weight of what they'd done. Jessica was isolated, Greg was broken, and Mark and Derek had all but vanished. The destruction was complete, and I could finally breathe again, knowing that every piece of my plan had fallen perfectly into place. But I wasn't done yet. Not entirely. There was one last act of closure I needed to perform, and it wasn't for them, it was for me. The final act of closure wasn't something I planned to share with anyone. It was personal, a way to reclaim my dignity and bury the pain they'd caused me. I went back to the house one last time. Jessica had been staying with a friend since the confrontation, and the place was eerily quiet without her. Walking through the rooms, I couldn't help but feel a mix of nostalgia and bitterness. This had been our home, where we dreamed of a future together. Now, it was just a hollow shell filled with memories that had been tainted by her betrayal. In the bedroom, I found the small box where we kept our keepsakes. Photos, ticket stubs, little trinkets from vacations. I rifled through it, pulling out anything that reminded me of her, and piled it all on the bed. One by one, I went through each item, letting myself feel the sting of those memories for the last time. The photo of us on our honeymoon, where she'd promised me the world. The necklace I gave her on our 5th anniversary, which she'd likely worn while lying to my face. The handwritten note she'd left in my lunch one day, telling me how much she loved me. I burned it all. The fire roared in the backyard pit as I stood there, watching the flames consume every last trace of her. The weight in my chest lightened with every flicker, every ember that floated into the night sky. By the time it was over, I felt free. The next morning, I finalized the divorce paperwork and sent it to her lawyer. The terms were firm and unapologetic. No financial support, no claims on the house, no alimony. She had betrayed me, and she would leave with nothing. Jessica tried to fight it, of course, but her lawyer quickly realized the evidence I had would crush any case she attempted to make. Within weeks, the divorce was finalized. Her parents reached out to me after everything was settled. They apologized again, promising to cut ties with her until she truly took accountability for what she'd done. It wasn't much comfort, but it was something. As for me, I moved out of the house and into a new apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine, free of her shadow. The last loose end came a month later when I got a call from one of my former coworkers. Apparently, Greg and Mark had tried to get new jobs in the same industry, but word of their misconduct had followed them. Their reputations were ruined, and they'd been blacklisted by several companies. Derek, on the other hand, had disappeared completely. And Jessica? I heard through the grapevine that she was working a part-time job and living alone. Her once vibrant social life reduced to a handful of sympathetic friends. I didn't feel sorry for her. I wasn't angry anymore either. The fire, both literal and metaphorical, had burned away the anger, leaving me with something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Life moved on as it always does, and so did I. Months passed, and I began rebuilding the pieces of my life. First, it wasn't easy. The betrayal had left scars, but I was determined not to let them define me. Work became my anchor. With Greg, Mark, and Derek gone, there was a vacuum in the department. I stepped up, taking on new responsibilities and proving my worth to management. Within 6 months, I was promoted to a leadership role, a position Greg had once held. The irony wasn't lost on me. Outside of work, I started reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during my marriage. Nights out, casual dinners, and honest conversations reminded me that I wasn't alone. People who truly cared about me stood by my side, and their support helped me heal. One evening, while scrolling through old photos on my phone, I stumbled across a picture of Jessica and me on our wedding day. I stared at it for a long moment before deleting it. She was a part of my past now, and that's where she belonged. Eventually, I started dating again. First, it was awkward. I wasn't sure if I could trust someone else, let alone open up. But then I met someone, Claire. She was different, warm, grounded, and honest in a way that felt refreshing. We met through mutual friends, and our connection grew naturally. There was no pretense, no games, just two people enjoying each other's company. On our third date, I told her about my past, laying everything bare. I expected her to flinch, maybe even pull away. Instead, she listened, her eyes kind and understanding. "That's awful," she said, reaching for my hand. "But it says a lot about you that you didn't let it break you." For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. As the seasons changed, so did I. The pain of Jessica's betrayal dulled, replaced by a quiet sense of acceptance. What happened to her, to Greg, to the others no longer mattered. I had moved on, and I was finally happy. One day, while packing up some old boxes, I found a card Jessica had given me on our first anniversary. Inside, she had written, "No matter what happens, I'll always love you." I read it once, smiled faintly, and threw it in the trash without a second thought. The past was gone, but the future was mine to shape. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace it. Time marched on, and the life I rebuilt began to flourish. My promotion at work not only brought new challenges but also offered me the opportunity to implement changes that genuinely made a difference. The shadow of Greg and the others faded, their names rarely mentioned except as cautionary tales. Claire and I continued to grow closer. She was everything Jessica wasn't: empathetic, patient, and most importantly, genuine. She encouraged me to pursue hobbies I had long neglected. Together, we hiked, tried new restaurants, and even signed up for a cooking class. One evening, as we sat on my couch sharing a bottle of wine, she asked me something that caught me off guard. "Do you ever think about her? About Jessica?" The question hung in the air for a moment before I answered. "Not really," I said honestly. "I used to in the beginning, but now, she's just a part of my past. She doesn't matter anymore." Claire smiled softly, leaning her head against my shoulder. "That's good. You deserve peace." Her words stayed with me. For years, I had carried the weight of Jessica's betrayal, letting it shape how I saw myself. But now, sitting there with Claire, I realized that the pain no longer defined me. The ultimate closure came unexpectedly. I ran into Jessica one day at a local coffee shop. She was sitting alone by the window, her hair tied back and her face drawn, as if the years had weighed heavily on her. She noticed me before I could turn away, her eyes widening in recognition. She hesitated, then waved tentatively. Against my better judgment, I approached her table. "Ethan," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. Hi, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She gestured to the seat across from her. Do you want to sit? I almost declined but decided against it. I pulled out the chair and sat, meeting her gaze. You look well, she said after a moment. I am, I replied. Life's been good. She nodded, fidgeting with her coffee cup. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, for everything. Her words didn't carry the weight they might have years ago. I didn't feel the anger, the bitterness, or even the satisfaction I thought I might. Instead, I felt nothing. I appreciate that, I said simply. I hope you've learned from it. Her face flushed slightly, and she nodded. I have. I lost a lot because of my choices. I'm glad you're doing okay. I stood up, not wanting to linger. Take care of yourself, Jessica. As I walked away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. That brief encounter proved what I already knew. I had moved on. Jessica was a distant chapter in my life, one I had long since closed. When I got home that evening, Claire was waiting for me. She greeted me with a smile, and I pulled her into a hug, holding her close. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, kissing her forehead. Everything's perfect. For the first time in years, it truly was. The years that followed cemented the new life I had built. Claire and I continued to grow as a couple, eventually moving in together. She brought an energy to my life that I hadn't realized I was missing. It wasn't just love. It was partnership, mutual respect, and a genuine understanding of each other. At work, I thrived in my new role. I had become a trusted leader, and my team valued my input. The workplace drama of the past was a distant memory, one I rarely thought about unless prompted by a curious newcomer who had heard whispers of the scandal. One day, out of the blue, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, I owe you an apology. It was from Greg. I hesitated before opening it. I hadn't thought about him in years, and seeing his name brought a brief flicker of the anger I had once carried. But curiosity got the better of me and I clicked. The email was long and surprisingly heartfelt. Ethan, I don't expect you to read this or even forgive me, but I felt like I needed to write it. Losing my job, my wife, and my reputation was the wake-up call I didn't realize I needed. What I did to you was unforgivable, and I've spent years regretting my actions. You didn't deserve any of it, the betrayal, the humiliation, the fallout. I was selfish and arrogant, and I let my worst impulses control me. I've tried to rebuild my life, but the shame of what I did still follows me. I hope you found peace and happiness, Ethan. You deserved better than what any of us gave you. For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry. Take care, Greg. I read the email twice, unsure of how I felt. There was a time when I would have craved this apology, when I would have savored the acknowledgement of his guilt. But now it felt like a distant echo of a life I no longer lived. I didn't reply. Claire noticed my quiet mood that evening. We were sitting on the couch, a movie playing in the background, when she nudged me gently. Something on your mind? I told her about the email, about Greg's apology, and how I wasn't sure how to feel about it. She took my hand, her thumb brushing over my knuckles. You don't owe him anything, she said softly. Not your forgiveness, not your time, nothing. You've moved on. That's all that matters. She was right. I didn't need closure from Greg or Jessica or anyone else. I had already found it in the life I had built, the love I had found with Claire, and the peace I carried within myself. That night, as we sat together, her head resting on my shoulder, I felt a quiet contentment settle over me. The past was just that, the past. My life was in the present, and the future was mine to create. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Life unfolded with a steady rhythm, and the scars of the past faded further into the background. Claire and I grew closer with every passing day, building a relationship based on trust and mutual respect. She wasn't just my partner. She was my best friend. We talked about the future often. Marriage, kids, and even opening a business together someday. Claire had a knack for design and a sharp eye for aesthetics, and the idea of her bringing that to life in a creative way excited both of us. One evening, while we were having dinner at our favorite restaurant, I decided to take a leap. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, placing it on the table between us. Claire's eyes widened as she looked at me, her expression a mix of surprise and joy. "Ethan," she whispered. I smiled, feeling a calm confidence I hadn't felt the first time I'd proposed to someone. "Claire, you've brought so much light into my life. You've shown me what real love looks like. I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, her smile lighting up the entire room. "Yes, of course I will." The restaurant burst into applause as I slid the ring onto her finger. It was a small, intimate moment, but it was perfect. Planning the wedding was an adventure in itself. We decided on a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Nothing extravagant. My parents were thrilled, and even Jessica's parents, who had stayed in touch with me after the divorce, reached out to offer their congratulations. The wedding day was everything I could have hoped for. As Claire walked down the aisle, radiant in her dress, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The pain, the betrayal, the heartache. All of it had led me to this moment. When we exchanged vows, my voice broke slightly as I promised to love and cherish her for the rest of my life. Claire's words were equally heartfelt, and by the time we kissed, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The reception was filled with laughter, dancing, and the kind of joy that felt like a reward for everything I had endured. As the night drew to a close, Claire and I slipped away quietly, ready to begin the next chapter of our lives. In the weeks that followed, I reflected on how far I'd come. The man I was now felt like a distant stranger to the one who had been betrayed and broken. I had rebuilt my life, brick by brick, and found happiness I once thought was impossible. The future was no longer something to fear. It was a blank canvas, waiting for Claire and me to paint it together. And for the first time, I was excited to see what it would become. The honeymoon was a dream. Claire and I spent 2 weeks exploring Italy, wandering through cobblestone streets, eating at tiny family-owned restaurants, and laughing until our sides hurt. One night, as we sat on a terrace overlooking the Tuscan countryside, she took my hand and said, "I never thought love could feel this easy." Her words stuck with me. Love had always seemed complicated before, tied up in trust issues and pain. But with Claire, it was different. It was simple, honest, and real. When we returned home, life settled into a happy routine. I poured myself into work, while Claire started freelancing, taking on design projects that lit up her creative side. Our apartment became a haven, filled with warmth and laughter. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she looked at me and said, "Let's make a home, a real one." I knew exactly what she meant, and the idea thrilled me. It was time to take the next step. We spent the next month house hunting. Claire was meticulous, going through every listing with a designer's eye. I just wanted a place with good lighting and enough space for both of us to work comfortably. Finally, we found it. A charming house on the edge of the city, with a big backyard and plenty of natural light. The moment we stepped inside, Claire turned to me with a grin. "This is it," she said. We moved in a few weeks later. Unpacking was chaotic but exciting. We painted the walls together, argued over furniture placement, and turned the space into something uniquely ours. One night, as we sat on the living room floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. "This feels like home," she whispered. And for the first time, it truly did. The years passed, and life only grew sweeter. Claire and I filled our home with love, laughter, and eventually, the pitter-patter of tiny feet. Our daughter, Lily, was born 2 years after we moved into the house, and she became the light of our lives. Parenthood was a challenge, but it brought Claire and me even closer. Every sleepless night, every shared milestone, every moment of joy reminded me how lucky I was to have found her. One evening, as Lily played on the living room floor, Claire sat beside me on the couch. She rested her head on my shoulder, her fingers laced with mine. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked softly. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. Not anymore. It's like a book I finished long ago. One I don't need to reread. She smiled, her eyes full of love. Good. You deserve to be happy. As I watched Lily giggle and chase after her toys, I realized I was happy. Truly, deeply happy. The wounds of the past had healed, leaving behind a life I couldn't have imagined in my darkest moments. This was my story now. A loving wife, a beautiful daughter, and a future that felt as bright as the sun streaming through our windows. I leaned down to kiss Claire's forehead. "Thank you for being my second chance," I whispered. She smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you for letting me be." And with that, we turned our attention back to Lily, the embodiment of the life we'd built together. The past was gone, and the future was ours to write.